Hi everybody, this is Brendan here at the Common Motor Collective. That's common-motor.com on the internet as always. Today we're going to be talking about electrical. So I got some electrical wires. It's a challenge that a lot of us are facing when dealing with vintage motorcycles, and we're going to show you some tools, some techniques, some processes and supplies that you can use to improve and fix your electrical system on your bike, because it seems like no matter what, someone has been in there before you and destroyed or hacked something up. And it's a common question we get from a lot of folks, and a lot of us are gonna have to deal with it. And electrical is an ongoing maintenance thing on a bike, so let's get into how we're going to do this the right way versus the hack job way. So let's check it out. All right, so we're looking at some of the various different electrical components and parts and pieces that you're going to use in your Honda, whatever it's a 350 or 360, 450. I mean, basically all the mid-70s Hondas. So let's just kind of go through some of the bits and pieces here. We got all kinds of wiring we have available, the proper gauge wiring, good multi-strand copper stuff. And we have kits that we're putting together with lots of different colors and assortments, or we can get wire in larger varieties here. Down here, ones that people are very interested in. These are the proper bullet connectors, like that came on the bike, and these are the high quality Japanese ones, not the mystery ones that a lot of them are floating on the market. Single bullet male, single bullet female, and double female, all with the appropriate vinyl covers. So when you actually do a repair, they look correct and professional, like they were done at the factory. Over here, multi-pin connectors with the appropriate terminals, like in high quality brass stuff, not junk. 3, 4, and 6 pin configurations. Again, if you're doing a repair, this is standard stuff that's on the harnesses already. If not, you can configure your own as needed. Various sizes of heat shrink tubing. This is the thermal barrier tubing for things like the wires coming out of the ignition points or out of the stator cover for the alternator, or the stator itself, thermal stuff. One of my favorites, decent quality, actually it's a pretty high quality crimp tool. This is what makes all the difference, especially when you're using any of these parts, having a tool like this that will crimp the ends properly. And we're going to actually show you how to use this. This took us a long time to find, so we're really glad that we have this available for you guys, because a good one is hard to get. So yeah, we have all these things available. We're having some kits we're putting together with various components and configurations. If there's something here you want, you don't see, let us know, and we will do our best to accommodate it. But this should cover most of your bases as far as the supplies you're going to need to repair your wiring harness. So here's a kind of an assortment of some of the other tools and pieces you might run across in doing electrical work. I got a pair of wire strippers. This is my personal preference on this style wire stripper. The pivot is here, and it actually has the different gauge holes on the far side of the pivot versus ones that have them down here. I personally don't care for those. This is another style. It's kind of variable. A lot of guys like this, we have these available as well. They're really flexible and easy to use. This right here, soldering iron cleaning pads, basically just like a brass, like a Brillo pad. Man, soldering is going to be a really important thing. We're going to show you how to do some soldering. A lot of folks are really intimidated by soldering, and part of the problem is they don't have a big enough soldering iron. They don't get the piece hot enough to let the solder flow correctly. So we'll show you some examples of that. Heat gun, man, really important tool for the heat shrink. It makes quick work of it. Wood, that's actually for the solder. We'll show you how to use that. Electrical tape. Not a huge fan of electrical tape myself. I use it in a very limited basis, and of course you can come in any variety of colors. I just see people kind of misuse it as a catch-all, and it's supposed to be used in certain ways and not used in other ways, so people kind of abuse it. Little things that are helpful, like small zip ties, are helpful to keep things oriented. And then we have things like this. These are very common like auto parts store style terminals, whether it's a ring terminal or a spade terminal or a bullet terminal. They'll be color coded based on diameters, like blues, yellows, and reds, depending on the wire gauge used. I personally kind of like these right here. They don't have a little plastic. Not that, like these guys right here. They don't have the plastic on them, because you can actually crimp them and solder them well. And we'll show you some techniques on that. And yeah, so this is some of the other stuff you might use. I also have a set of wire cutters here. Like this is my own personal set that I like to use, cutting wire. Everybody has their preference, but all this stuff will work and is appropriate. In the end, we're going to end up probably making something like this. Let's see that a little better camera. There's some wire. You know, we have our female bullet connectors on it. We have a zip tie. We have some heat shrink, and we actually have a spade terminal here that's been crimped and soldered correctly. So ultimately, we can make really high quality electrical pieces as we need them because we have all the right parts and components and tools to do it. So let's get into some techniques on how to start doing this stuff. So we're going to actually kind of show you how to do the stripping the wire, getting the wire prepped for let's say a terminal like this to go on. But the very first thing I'm going to do, like I know that this terminal uses this boot. I need to put the boot onto the wire. If you're using a boot or if you're using heat shrink like that, you need to cut it ahead of time and slide it on the wire before you even put a terminal on the end of it. So first step is to put the boot on, and I just got a little bit of Windex right here, which I'm going to get into my boot, get it kind of lubed up because a lot of times it's a tight fit. Come on, twisting it, kind of pushing it, and there it goes. Alright, the boot is on. I'm just going to slide him out of the way because we're not going to need it. Alright, we'll come back to him later. That's just kind of to prep it for whatever happens on the end of the terminal here. So with this style terminal, I have two areas. I have this kind of bigger piece right here, and I have this smaller area. This bigger piece crimps around the outer plastic, so the orange part of this, whereas the inner part here will crimp around where the actual naked wires are. So to kind of gauge this, I need about, I would say about that much exposed wire. So let's just go like that, and I'm going to use it's my preferred type of wire stripper here. We're working with a 14 gauge here. I'm going to cut it nice and clean like that. It really makes a big difference having a high quality wire stripper because you'll get a nice clean cut and pull with that. And so let's take a look here, see how that kind of, actually that's a little bit long. See how the kind of the hairs of the wire, let me get my pointer. Where are you, pointer? Here you are. See how I'll put this down here. We want to be able to kind of crimp this guy onto the wire here. And you want to be able to crimp clean on the wires here, but then we have a lot of extra kind of wires sitting out here. So I'm going to cut, I don't know, a little bit off the end of there and try it again and see if we can get that a little bit better. So it's important that when we're stripping the wire, we kind of get the amount of wire that has been stripped from the housing correct, depending on the type of terminal we're using. However, this might work better on a different style terminal, but for this one, kind of give it a little twist. I go into my own personal set of wire cutters, something like that maybe. Shorten it up just a little bit. Let's see how that fits now. That's a lot better. See how that kind of butts up in there? And we're going to get a clean crimp here on the wire, and then we're going to get a good clean crimp on the outer terminal here. And it depends on the type of terminal you're using. Let's take a look at something like a ring terminal here. Like that's one of our kind of naked ring terminals. If I just went in here with this, that's a little bit short. So kind of where I had the wire before may have worked better. I want it to stick out just a hair. So again, you have to kind of gauge that based on the type of terminal you're using. We're going to do another, I'll show you how to do it with this style cutter, because that's a question I know you guys are going to ask. And this is actually a cutter slash stripper. So I'm just going to cut this whole thing off like that and start over again, clean. I'm going to set this to my wire gauge, which is like 14. A lot of guys who use this style stripper tend to just kind of go on feel like that. These work well, but they definitely take practice to use because you can actually cut too much, but they're easy. They're simple, is what I should say. And they fit a lot of wires. Let's take a look at that again now. See how we went. I would still say it's a little bit on the long side, probably cut a little bit more off. Again, I always kind of overshoot with my wires because I don't want to have too short of a wire. You can always cut the wire later. Let's see here. Let's go back to that ring terminal. We can see how that was fitting on there. This might be a good length for something like that. Give them a little twist so it go everywhere. Yeah, you see how that just sticks out just a hair there? So when I crimp that, we're going to make sure we have a good engagement of the terminal on the wire. But again, every terminal is a little different on how it fits. Let me go use a different, more common terminal to kind of show my example. So here's our our typical kind of like auto parts store spade terminal, which you might find yourself using. I personally don't like this plastic piece on here. I mean, you can kind of get the wire in here and see how it's starting to kind of stick out just a hair there from the end. It's about the right length. Again, I don't care for this. What I'll do is I take them off. So let's see if we can actually yank this off of here and go with it naked. There we go. That's how I like the terminal, because now I can actually get a good clean crimp on the wire, and then actually I will solder this. I solder all my connections. That way you know they're permanent and they're not going to come loose. Yeah, that's a pretty good fit right there. See how it just sticks out there just a little bit? I would probably not go any longer than that. So again, it depends on the type of terminal you're using and how long you want to strip the wire. So again, we'll do one more demonstration on the wire cutting. So I'm just going to cut that. On this one, I'm using the different gauge. I know this is a 14 gauge wire. Squeeze, pull. Should come off nice and clean, like that. If it's not coming off clean, it's probably your stripper you're using. So again, I can't stress having a quality stripper. And I said these guys are probably the best quality, best bang for the buck. This style, because they fit all sorts. So let's see how that works on here. That's like perfect. It's like a perfect fit right there. Cool. All right, well now we're gonna get into crimping next. All right, so step one is I'm gonna go ahead and put my terminal on my wire. And you can see that these back pieces here, I'm pointing out with my thumb, that's the very first area we're gonna crimp. So I'm gonna use the larger opening here on the crimp tool. I'm gonna make sure you guys can see that really well. In fact, let me get the terminal kind of positioned in here well. You can see that? I'm gonna gently just squeeze it. See how that little peak fits in the top of the groove there? That's what we want when we set the terminal up. So that guy's ready to go. I'm gonna take my wire, seat it in there. I'm gonna come from this, and I'm gonna give it a crimp. Good squeeze with the tool here. All right, let's see what we got with that first part. You see how those back pieces have kind of curled around or are now grabbing the plastic, the orange piece of the wire, the housing. So it's step one, and now that's not going to go anywhere. It's actually holding onto the wire. Step two is we're going to crimp these inner terminals around to actually grab the wire itself. So what I have to do is I have to flip this over like that. Same drill. Coming in from the top. You guys see that piece there? The point coming in from the top. Same thing. Get it all lined up. Give it a squeeze, just like that. All right, so you see how it kind of curled those guys around and is now grabbing the wire. Part three. I've noticed sometimes, depending on the terminal and the tool, with this tool in particular, sometimes these don't get quite squeezed as tight as we want to on the wire. So I'm going to use the very end of this tool here where this flat is. I'm going to put it right where we crimped before. I'm just going to give it a little bit of an extra squeeze here, just a hair, not much, just to make sure that that guy is really squeezing on the wires there. And that's that. That is a really clean installation of a terminal on a wire. Now, myself, I would solder this to finish the job right, but most people will stop here. We're going to crimp a couple other terminals on, and you can take a look and see how we approach that. This takes practice. You're not going to be able to nail it the first time. It's kind of a feel exercise. So I suggest having some extra wire around and knowing you're going to go through some terminals and practice your crimping, because crimping ain't easy. And it takes practice. So if you don't nail it the first time, that's all right. Keep doing it until you get it right. So there's that one. We had our boot on here from earlier, so ideally we would have slid the boot down with the wire. But we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to cut this off here. Put it aside. We're going to crimp a completely different terminal on here. Got my stripper here. And I didn't even go like that far, maybe. Okay, so back to get a twist. Like that. We're going to use this ring terminal here, and this is kind of a generic ring terminal from like the auto parts store, electronics store, something like that. It's pretty heavy gauge, and so we'll crimp this on. We'll use the same crimp tool, same deal. And I need a little more wire coming out the end of that, so I'm going to take a little more off. Maybe like that. There you go. Just try that there. Do a twist. Let's see how that fits on there. Come on, rogue wire. Just get them all. Okay, I like how that just sticks out just a hair there. As I pointed out earlier, that there's a seam right here on the top. That's where our top of our crimp tool is going to go. And I'm not sure what size to use here. I'm probably going to use like this one. Again, when you're mixing up kind of terminals and crimp tools, you have to kind of experiment and figure out which one might work best. So I think I'm going to go with that one there. This is a pretty thick piece here. I might have to do 2 crimps on it, like one at the very front here, and I'll slide it back together. So let's give that a try. See what happens. Yeah, that felt good. Look at that. So how that got nice and clean on there. I'm going to give another one at the back side of it here to make sure we kind of got it nice and even. There you go. That's a nice clean crimp there. It's holding on the wire. Yeah, it's got a little bit of play. So again, I might have to give it a squeeze. That's why I tugged on it to see like how much it needed. Let me give this with 2 hands. It's fitting on there pretty good. Heck, I can even probably come in tighter with this top one here. Give it another squeeze. I'm coming in with a little bit tighter side. Watch. See if it crimps down. Oh yeah, that felt good. Just like that. Come on. Now that is nice and tight on there. I can just feel that just really compress and squeeze down. So it takes practice. That was a total exercise and kind of feel, see how well it fit. On a terminal like this, again, I would probably solder it. We'll do a soldering demo here in a minute. But that's how to do that kind of terminal. Let's cut that one off and we'll save it for soldering. And we'll use our other wire stripper just to practice right here. Got that far. Kind of pulling this up at an angle to make the cut. Like that. Let's try that. We're going to crimp on this really cheapy spade terminal, like auto parts store special here. And I went ahead and yanked off the little blue boot that's on the bottom. This stuff's pretty thin, so I think these will crimp easy. Let's see what happens here. We want a little more coming out. Remember, we cut it a little bit long. We can always trim it, so I'm not too worried about that. Twist it up. Just get it in here. All right, I can go with that. It's kind of poking out a little bit. Got like one rogue wire. Okay, do the same drill here. Do that split at the top. I'm gonna come in with the small one here. Make sure I'm lined up well. You can guys see it on that side. Like that. Let's give that a try. See how well it works. So these guys are thin. I can feel them. Oh yeah, it's really thin. There we go. That even feels a little loose on there for me. It has a little bit of wiggle to it. So that's a good time where you take something like the end there and give it another squeeze just to make sure you got it on there good and tight. And again, to make this most permanent would be to solder that terminal in place. But that's not a bad one right there. That's holding with a little bit of extra squeeze there. So that would work. But again, without the support around it, it's just kind of like on the end of the wire. Again, we'll solder this and we'll show you how I would actually finish this terminal off correctly for an application. So let's cut it off. Come back to it. These guys, these are the little terminals that are used in like the plastic connectors, like that. They go on the same way as the bullets do. So you do the 1, 2, 3 process on all of them and put them together. So just in case you're wondering, they actually have the same crimping style. Crimping style. Hilarious. All right, let's do some soldering. Show you how to do make sure these joints are permanent. Like, where do we actually touch the iron and where do we touch the solder? And ideally, the iron, it gets hot. And let's say hypothetically, I'm touching the end of the wire here. I don't want to be using the iron to specifically melt the solder. I want to use the iron to heat up the base thing that I'm soldering, in this case, the wire or the terminal. And when I start my solder joint, what I'll usually do is I'll start my solder joint right here where the iron is touching. So I am touching the tip of the iron, but what happens is that's the hottest spots because that's where we touched first, right? And the heat will then radiate out throughout the wire as it warms up. So I'm going to start my solder joint here, boom, and as it starts to flow, I would actually work my way further into the part. So where to position the iron just kind of comes from experience as you are using it. So if I position the iron here, right, I'm really close to the plastic, I'm really going to probably melt the plastic versus away from the plastic and letting the heat kind of radiate this way. I don't want to be melting the solder into the iron like up here. I want to be right there where it's touching and get that started and get the flow going. I mean, obviously we have this off right now. But yeah, that's kind of that was a good question about like where do I touch the solder? Ideally, I could touch this here and have the solder over here and wait for it to get warm. But then we're usually by that point everything's too hot, so that's why I kind of work right where I touch and then let it flow out from there. So it's again that takes practice. Again, all this stuff is we can explain it here, we can show you a demo, but it does take practice to do. So take some wire, take some terminals, take some solder, and get to it because practice makes perfect. I got my soldering iron warmed up, and we have our wires here that we did some crimping on, and we're going to solder those terminals in place. When it comes to soldering irons, people tend to buy too small of an iron. This one's like a 45 watt iron here. What I'm doing is I'm cleaning the tip, and this is just this like kind of like brass Brillo pad here. See how the tip's all nice and shiny now? That's how we want it. And ideally, you can take our solder, and we can actually touch it on here, and it should melt instantly like that. So that's how you know you've got a good hot iron and it's good and clean. So again, a hot iron and a good clean iron is a big piece of this equation. So I've got a board here, and I like to solder on a board if I can because it gives me a base to press down with the iron on that doesn't going to be absorbing heat. Because soldering is kind of a quick operation. When the iron's hot, it's a boom, 1, 2, 3, you're in and out fast. So what we're going to solder this this terminal onto the wire here that we crimped earlier, and let's see if I can get it in a position where it ain't going to roll around, so you guys can see this. Something like that right there. All right, why don't you go ahead and get zoomed in with the camera? All right. Zoomed in like right here. All right, so I'm going to come in. It's going to be kind of hard to come in this way. I got some solder right here ready to go. This is rosin core solder, which cleans as it melts. And then I'm going to touch it right here on top of the terminal, and you're going to see how this stuff works like lightning. So ready, we're going to go. Getting hot, and then there we go. Come on. There we go. See how it nice and flows? Nice and clean. That's going to be a nice positive solder joint there. See how it's nice and smooth and it's not like all clumped up and balled up and it's kind of shiny. This is we got it totally hot enough for that part. And it was fast. And it's because the iron is nice and hot. If you're sitting there struggling to get the solder to melt, iron means you don't have a hot enough iron for the thing you're working on. So yeah, that's a really nice solder joint there. So that's now a permanent connection for now until you unsolder it. We're gonna come back to that. So we're gonna try this other piece right here. This is that kind of wimpy spade terminal we pressed on here. So I'm actually gonna approach it from this side here. Get it hot. Let's see if we can. Here we go. Beautiful. 1, 2, 3. Didn't take much. I don't want to get it so hot. You can already see right here where the plastic was starting to kind of melt a little bit. So that's why you gotta be fast with it. Otherwise, this thing will just all deteriorate here. But now that's a good positive connection on that terminal, so that's not going to come off at all. So put him aside, let him cool. We'll finish it off here in a minute. Our bullet terminal. I'm going to do the same thing, and I have to be really quick about this one because the solder's going to want, the iron's going to want to melt the plastic right here. Again, we're just putting a tiniest drop of solder in here to get this thing in position. And like I tell you, I like to solder all my terminals. Let's do something like that. I'm just using that as a little bit of a weight there. Same deal. I'm going to rotate that a little bit. I want to come in from the end as far as I can from the plastic so I can get the heat right there. Hot. Ooh, look at that. Just like that. Real fast. Just like crimping, soldering takes practice, so don't be surprised if we don't get it right on the first time. And I actually took a lot of solder there. You can see it kind of is puddled up. We'll have to see how well the connection fits in. If it's blocking the pin that goes in here, we might have to remove solder, which is a whole other operation. And you can see where it started to get a little warm here on the plastic, and it kind of bubbled up. So again, you got to work fast when you go on solder. But the good news with solder is it's a permanent connection. It's not going to let go. So yeah, there you go. It's a soldered on terminals. So that's a quick lesson on terminal soldering. So this is actually a wiring harness off of another motorcycle, but I kept it because it's a really good example of a poorly done hack job wiring on the bike. And first one I want to talk about is these things right here. These are called butt splices, which means you just take two ends of the wire and you squeeze them together, and all of a sudden you made a longer wire. You see we have some here and here. Really common at the auto parts store. You see these all the time. The reality is these are pretty much junk. They're garbage, and if you run into a wiring harness that's been put together like this, it's really been kind of rigged together. It's a hack job, and it should be done properly. So I never use these things. In fact, I don't even keep them at the shop because that's how terrible they are. I would only use them I was in a situation where I had to get something put back together quickly on the side of the road, and I'd repair it later. So again, if you see this kind of stuff, avoid it and try to repair it properly. We also have like this guy here, which is this little like clip together guy where you're supposed to be able to add a wire to an existing wire. Again, it's people use them as permanent fixes. They're kind of temporary. They're crappy, and they always come out. So again, I try not to use this type of stuff because they're just so low quality, and they don't quite do what they're supposed to do, especially over a long period of time. So yeah, that's an example of some bad wiring there, and bad crimping that's not been soldered. So we will try to avoid that as much as we can. So instead of using a butt splice, I'm going to show you guys how to splice two wires together, and we're actually solder them because that's the proper way of doing it. So I've stripped off these two different wires here. I got about an inch of open wire. Again, you can always trim the wires shorter later. So strip these two, I'm going to solder them. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my heat shrink, and I'm going to cut a piece of heat shrink because oftentimes you can't get the heat shrink on after you've already soldered the wire. I'm going to go with a piece about yay big. Come on, there we go. My heat shrink, I'm going to go ahead and just put it on this green wire first. Twist that up a little bit so I don't fray everywhere. And we'll come back to the heat shrink in a minute. Get them out of the way. Okay. So, two wires here. Basically, I'm going to kind of take the wires and I'm going to tie them into like a knot. I'm just going to kind of twist them over each other. Now, there's lots of different techniques on kind of twisting wires together and putting wires together. This one is what I like to use. Experiment, come up with your own. But ideally, we're just trying to get the wires just kind of tied together into kind of a clump here. And then now we're going to solder that clump so it's a permanent connection. Versus way better than trying to use a butt splice. So there's our clump. Take my iron. I'm going to clean my iron. And when you do one of these, they tend to take a little bit more solder than you think because it's kind of there's a little wire there actually in that little clump. So got plenty of solder out. Coming straight in the middle of it with the iron. Solder right at the tip of the iron and just let it flow. See how it's flowing nice and smooth and easy? There we go. Let's stop right there. Take a look at it. It's not bad. I might put a tad more on this side here, and then I'd call it quits, but that's probably okay where it is. It's not going to go anywhere. But I'm going to go ahead and just put solder all the way around it. So let's get this heat on it right here. Come in. There we go. That cool. Again, we're pretty quick with the iron. We're not putting a bunch of heat into it, and that is going to be kind of there's a nice, decent splice here. We have a little booger hanging off, but we can always trim that out of the way. And yeah, that's going to be a permanent connection between two wires that is not going to come apart. I mean, you're going to yank on that. You'll probably break the wire before you break the solder joint there. And so I'm going to let that cool off, and then we'll do our last piece of that splice. But that's a proper way to put two different wires together. Now, if you're doing multiple wires, let's say you have 2 or 3 wires that need to come out of the splice, you can do all the same way, any kind of arrangement. I find the end-to-end butt to be the most difficult for people to do. If you're doing ones that where the wire is going to be, parallel to each other, it's easier to do that as far as the joint go. But yeah, this is that's kind of the toughest one to do right there. That one came out pretty decent. I'm pretty happy with that. So yeah, it's definitely cool enough now. Okay. Remember our heat shrink? Well, here's our heat shrink right there, right over the middle of it. Make it permanent. I got my heat gun ready to go. And that right there is a nice quality permanent repair. It's not going to come apart with 2 different wires. So that's how you approach that guy. Let's use some more heat shrink and finish up the other wires that we soldered here a little while ago. Our last thing we're going to do is use some heat shrink. We're going to finish up this terminal the right way. And I don't know, we need maybe about that much heat shrink. Heat shrink is awesome. Once you start to use it, you probably never want to go back. So in this situation, I'm going to cover the whole dang terminal here, just like that. I'm actually kind of stopping a little bit. I don't want to be like that. I want it to be a little bit over because it's going to get smaller, right? So let's do that. Come back. Like that. All right. Heat gun. There we go. Oh, it's getting hot. I can feel it. Cool. That is a nice finished terminal there. Actually, it ends a little bit closed. I'll take an X-Acto knife and I'll clean that up a little bit, but I'd rather it be tighter on this end than too open exposed. And that heat shrink is not only going to protect it, but it's also going to reinforce this joint here. It's just going to give us a little bit more stability here. So we've crimped, soldered, and heat shrunk this, and that to me is like a good permanent connection there, or permanent repair on the bike. So again, I would maybe slice it open a little bit with an X-Acto knife, but I'm pretty happy with that. Same drill. We're going to use we're going to go on this guy right here. Do we have that piece that just fell? Perfect. So something to think about with heat shrink is depending on what you're doing, sometimes you can get the heat shrink over the part you're working on already. Other times you have to get the heat shrink on first before you even crimp and solder. So keep that in mind. I can't tell you how many times I've been working on something that I forgot to put the heat shrink on first before I actually before I soldered, then I had to find out how to unsolder it and fix it. So on this guy, I'm going to kind of bring him maybe like right here. That's great. All right, and there's a nice clean connection there. A wire has been crimped, it's been soldered, it's been heat shrunk, and that's ready to go in service, and that's not gonna fail. It's not gonna break and come wiggle loose. So it's good there. Here is our original kind of bullet connector. Since we already soldered it, it's ready to go. All we need to do is slide up our housing here. Probably need to put some Windex on it because it's been sitting for a while. The Windex is just for lubrication. So we can get it going. Urgh. Yeah, now my fingers are all slippery. There we go. Boom, just like that. Nice and seated. So there is that's a finished, this would be a female bullet connector, like we saw on all the Hondas. So it's a nice, clean, professional, permanent repair there on a wire. So again, done the right way, not done the hack job way. So there's a couple other techniques we want to use, maybe a heat shrink on, or a way to bundle wires together. As you see, like on this particular piece we made, we have 2 wires going into a single terminal here. You can guarantee that those are soldered. And I'm just using a small little zip tie to kind of bundle my wires together, like things like this. Can help keep things ordered and neat as you're working on wiring. I'm going to show you another little trick here you can use heat shrink for. I'll take 2 different wires here, put the heat shrink on it, and I'm going to heat it up the heat shrink and use that as a little bit of a little tie instead of the zip tie. Now you can use it in like segments, so you can, depending on how much heat shrink you have, you can use the whole thing to keep the wires bundled together. Once you start using the heat shrink, you're going to get kind of creative with it and how you want to use it. You know, you can run that along the length of a cable, and that way you have all the wires nice and clean and bundled up together. So again, there's just some other techniques of using heat shrink and how to apply it to your repairing your harness or making a custom harness or whatever. So just some couple tricks there. All right, so I hope you all have learned a little bit about some wiring, soldering, terminals, crimping, all that stuff in order to make and repair your wiring harnesses on your bikes to make everything look better. Hopefully you can go from this mess to something nice and clean like this. Again, it takes practice, it takes patience, and you're gonna screw it up a couple times, it's okay. We've all done that. Again, this is Brendan, Common Motor, common-motor.com on the internet. Thanks for watching. If you like this, subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions, you can always reach us through our website on the contact form, and we will catch you next time. Thanks for watching.